Alright. So, most of you probably heard of Gaius Julius Caesar. He was assassinated in 44 on the Ides of March. Oh.
No, no.
So, he was a patrician, which meant he was a member of the highest class in Rome. Rome was strictly divided into three classes: senators, or patricians, equites, or knights, and plebs, who were the ordinary people. And then you had slaves below that, slaves and freedmen. So he was born at the top, but in the first century, people still had to prove themselves to get a claim in the Roman government. So, and the easiest way to do that was through the military. He spent his 30s and his late 20s and 30s as a soldier in Greece and in Spain, and he quickly showed a lot of promise as a soldier and as a general. And then coming back to Rome, he was elected consul, which is very, in many ways, similar to the position of president, except there were two of them that were equal. He was elected consul in 59, and his co-consul, Bibulus, was his enemy, and Caesar had to use heavy bribery to get the position, to get elected. And his year was marked by intrigue and scandal and lots of bribery. He was very much in debt at this point, and he was 41 years old. But in Rome, it was the custom for consuls to be given a command post right after their consulship. So usually in America, once the president retires, he's done. He usually doesn't re-enter public office. He writes his memoirs and goes into retirement. But in Rome, the custom was that once you reached the consulship, you would continue to serve as a statesman. You'd be given a general's command post somewhere in the empire, and that would be your imperium. Imperium originally didn't mean emperor as much as just commander. So his imperium was originally going to be in Italy, which would have given him no chance to get any war spoils or honor, but he used the courts to rearrange his command, and he was given Illyricum and Roman-held Gaul. So at this point, here's a map of France. Romans were already holding on to this much of France, basically. And they held most of Spain. And then they held about this much down into Italy, and so this was was Caesar's command. He held this, and this. He was given 4 legions, which would have been about 20,000 men. And his imperium was kind of just hold the peace, hold back invaders. But he wanted to do more than that. He wanted to advance rather than just hold the status quo. So he used several migrations that were going on at this time. People were migrating across the Rhine. This is Rhine River, as an excuse that was already of an upset of the status quo. So he invaded farther Gaul, and it took him about 9 years to conquer the whole thing. So he brought all of this under the Roman sphere of influence, and that's one of the things he became most famous for back in Rome. So the first section of the Gallic Wars, which you have before you, is him describing Gaul. It's the first chapter. He's going to talk about Aquitaine, Gaul proper, and Belgium, although he's going to refer to Belgium as going all the way to the modern Seine River, when in modern times it doesn't go that far. and he's going to mention a couple of different tribes, but it's the grammar isn't terribly difficult, so it's a good place to start. Caesar's Gaelic Wars has been used for decades as a good sort of entry for students into Latin grammar and Latin reading, because his grammar was considered pretty simple. But
Good general, not as good English.
yeah,
I think he wrote it purposefully simply too, so it would be good propaganda for the masses.
exactly. Yeah. He's sort of like an ancient Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was liked for his short sentences. All right. Gallia est omnis duis in partis tres. This is one of the most famous lines in Latin, and I gave it to you. All Gaul is divided into three parts. Quarum unum inquant Belgae. Can someone give me the subject of that clause?
Is it quorum, like as in like A4?
No. It's Quarum refers back to Gallia, or no, it refers back to the trace, refers back to the three parts. It refers back to the all, to the all Gaul. The subject is the unam Belgae. Well, the Belgae is the predicate. So one of which the Belgian tribe live in. And then, does that clause make sense to people? So he started with saying all Gauls divided into three parts, and now he's about to go on and say what those three parts are. So he's going to say one of which, another, and then the third. So the other is the Aquitaine, which is right here, modern Aquitaine. And then he's about to describe the other two. The third, which in our own tongue, then you have to jump to the verb. Does someone see what the verb is? No. So can you do this clause?
The third, which in their language they call Celtai, and we call Galli.
Mhm. Yeah, so Appelantor is doing double duty to go with both. They call themselves the Celts, and we call them the Gauls. Does anyone have any questions on that first verse? No? All right, this is where it gets a little tricky. Someone want to translate the noun and verb? Let's go, yeah.
Hi omnes lingua institutis legibus inter se differunt. Lingua, is that the subject?
No.
No?
Look at the notes on the side.
Oh. The omnes is the subject.
Mhm.
And then se differunt is the verb.
Just deferent.
Just
These all differ.
Differ, yeah.
Inter se is among themselves.
Oh,
And
yeah, okay.
Wish this had macrons. So it's in tongue, in institutions, in customs, and in laws. And here's where we get a little bit. We have a little bit of fun with the geographic. So he's about to mention the Garonne River. That's right here. And then the Matrona and Sequana. This is the Matrona, and this is the Sequana. It's the modern Marne and Seine. The Marne is known for having a big battle fought by it during World War I. So the tricky part with this is that the subject is the Garumna Flumen. Does everyone see that? So the Garonne River separates. And what's the direct object?
Gallows and Belgies.
From, yeah. So divides the Gauls, talking about Gaul proper, from Aquitaine, and Gaul proper from the Belgies. Does that make sense? Forum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae. Fortissimi is the strongest. Is the subject. Catherine, do you want to take a jump at this clause?
So, part, like is it like saying that the strongest part is Belgium?
Mm-hmm. The strongest tribe of the three. Yep. And then I gave you this next clause because it's a little tricky. On account of that, they are the longest removed from the culture and refinement of the Provence, which is the Roman-held Gaul established in 121 BC, and that merchants least frequently sell to them and import those things which tend to effeminate the mind. So Romans tend to think of Romans had this interesting view of tribes in that they despised them for being primitive, but they also tended to also admire them for being brave as a correlation, because they didn't have modern civilization. So you'll often see Roman authors referring to tribes in a way that both makes them seem pitiful but also admirable. It's kind of a strange quirk of Roman writing. So then we jump all the way down. Does anyone have any questions about verse 3? Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
Okay. 4. The verb is proximi sunt. Here we have another of those participles with auxiliary verbs. They are nearest to the Germans. Here we have another dative. And there we also have incolent. Do you want to do this clause, Kathleen?
Include. What was the last one?
They live. It's related, or it gives us the word colony.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people live. And qui is the subject referring back to Germanes. And Rhenum refers to this river, the Rhine River.
They live near the Rhine?
Across,
Across.
plus the accusative. And do you want to finish up the sentence? This quibusquam is with them,
Mhm.
and consonanters acting as an adverb.
They continually wage war with them.
Mm-hmm. Can you do the next sentence, or can you give me the Can you give me the subject of the next sentence? It's Helvetii. So he's about to mention another tribe. He's going to talk about the Helvetians, and they're living here, kind of in this area, which, as a lot of you may know, is right in the middle of the Alps. It's modern Switzerland. And they're included among the Gauls because they're a similar ethnic group, but they're also kind of separated from them because they have the Rhone and the Rhine and the Alps mountains separating them. And they're almost more like the Germans. Does anyone have any questions about that geographic note?
They use
Yep.
sans serif fonts.
Do they?
Use the sans serif fonts.
No,
Okay.
they did not. Can you, go to the verb, in that clause? Cato. Or do you want it? Okay.
Yes, Cole, it's to excel.
So they excel the other Gauls, Reliquos Gallos, in virtue for the same reason. The same reason being that they also continually, daily, wage war against the Germans. Romans thought that if you're living in a place all the time where you're waging war with them and you're in constant state of having to fight for your boundaries, then you will necessarily become more warlike and you'll become a better soldier. Then, if you flip over, I gave you the next clause as well, because they fight with the Germans in almost daily battles, when they either repel them for their own territories or themselves wage war on their frontiers. With frontiers is so borders. All right. Does the passage make sense to people so far? What he's doing? He's kind of laying out the different tribes and the different sections, the different regions of Gaul. Okay. Going to 5. Who has the subject?
Is it anyone?
That's-
Una plus.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's one part of which he's doing the same thing where he starts with the genitive and then goes into the verb. Of that. Yeah. And then he goes to which.
Which the Gauls.
That's very good. No, it's very good. You got that Gallos is accusative, but since it's following because we have
Subject of the substantive.
because it's dictum s, so it's impersonal. It is said that the Gauls hold this. Does that make sense? The verb. So the verb is the infinitive, but you want to translate it in English as though it's a finite verb, so not an infinitive, because dictum est makes an impersonal construct. So in English you have it happened, or it's done this way. That's an impersonal construct. It just sets up like people used to say this, or people tend to do this. It doesn't have a finite subject, so then the main verb is infinitive. Does anyone have any questions on that? No? Okay. Do you want to tackle the next clause?
Finitium starts
Mm-hmm.
at the head of the river, so at the top of the river, Ron,
Mm-hmm.
not right?
It takes its head. It takes its start. So the border starts
The border starts.
with the river Rhone.
Rhone, which also contains the Garuna river.
It also continues along the Garonne.
Continues, okay,
So that's the river right here.
all the way to the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
where Belgium is finished.
One would think that he would have a conjunction here, but he doesn't. So he's going the ocean and the borders of Belgium, which he's about to say, or he said earlier, are the Marne and the Seine, these rivers here. So he's saying that the Gauls, for like Gaul proper, is just this section. It's cut off by the Rhone, the Garonne, and then it's surrounded by the ocean on the west and northwest, and then you have the Marne and the Seine rivers. So, Gallia, Aquae, Hispania. Belgia, or I guess Belgica. And then pertinent, it touches, or they touch, to the lower part of the River Rhine, the inferior part of the River Rhine. Does everyone understand why it says the inferior part of the Rhine? Does anyone know what that means? To say the inferior part of the river?
The south?
Not the south, because they didn't tend to think of things necessarily as north to south oriented. They tended to think in terms of elevation. So you've got the Rhine starting up in the mountains here in Switzerland, or near modern Switzerland, and it flows north, but it flows downhill. So the inferior part is this part up here, the modern Low Countries of Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So they tend to, if they refer to something as the lower part of the river, they mean the part of the river that's flowing towards the sea and is literally lower in terms of elevation. So if a common example of this is people refer to Upper and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is the north part, and Upper Egypt is the south part, which can be very confusing to a Western student. All right, where are we? And then this part is a lot of fun because you got a vocab word here that I'm very fond of. Spectant, it looks, or they look, and look in the sense of it faces, not in the sense of the people are actually facing, but the country looks like it's facing. In septentrionem et orientem solum. What's orientem solum? Catherine?
Like, okay, solum being like alone.
It's sun. So.
Okay. So, like, it's facing the sun.
The rising of the sun, which is
Oh, east.
so it's facing east, but it's also facing the septentriones, which is literally the 7 oxen or the 7 plow oxen, which is the Latin way of referring to the Big Dipper. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. I just love that vocab word. So you have Belgium. They're separated from the extreme of Gaul. They're all the way up here, and they face north and east. Last verse of this chapter. Aquitania, he switches from referring to the region by the people to referring to the kind of the proper name for the region, which is denoted by the little I. Whenever you want to make a place down in Latin, you can just add an I, which is what we often do in English. Virginia, Pennsylvania. So Aquitania touches. You have to jump all the way down to pertinent for the verb. Touches the Garonne River and the Pyrenees, which I've drawn as little squiggly lines here, the Pyrenees Mountains, which aren't very tall, but it's definitely been a traditional border between France and Spain throughout the years. So the Pyrenees Mountains, and this clause is a little tricky. Eam partem oceani, so it touches the ocean at the part which touches ad Hispaniam. This is Hispania, Spain, modern Spain. Kathleen, translate the verb in the last clause. Mhm. And then what is Occasum solis?
Setting the sun.
And what's the last word?
I don't know that word.
I gave it up in 5, at the end of 5, ad septentriones, in the notes.
Oh, towards the oxen stars, is that what they call it?
Mhm.
Oxen stars.
The Big Dipper. So, got this. So he's saying it kind of points, if it looks like it looks like a triangle to him, it points west, but it also points north. And that is the first chapter of Caesar's Gallic War.